Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. Today, let's talk about Chariots. Now, regular viewers of the channel will know that I bash Chariots fairly regularly, particularly when I've been talking about the battalion box sets, the starter boxes. Simply put, I tend to find, in my experience, Chariots don't have quite the hitting power you would like. They're too slow because they don't have swift stride, meaning they're not really as capable as heavy cavalry of getting in and getting a job done. They also tend to lack in wounds and toughness. Whilst they are reasonably tough, they are still very easily reduced to kindling before they can get into your enemy ranks. So, is there a point? Well, actually, I think there is. I do think they have some merit on the tabletop, both tactically and thematically. And when I've mentioned Chariots before with a negative view, viewers have pointed out one of their strengths, which is perhaps actually emphasized as a result of the way we play the game right now, in what's now known as 1.5. Let's start with thematics, though. The rule of cool. There's some armies where Chariots absolutely belong from a thematic basis. And here I'm really thinking about Tomb Kings. Tomb Kings, obviously, the desert wastelands of Khemri, based on those ancient civilizations, heavily inspired by ancient Egypt, and presumably to an extent, albeit a lesser extent, the traditional foes of the Egyptians, things like the Hittites, for example, were all great users of chariots. And we are talking about a time in history, of course, where cavalry hadn't really become the major battlefield weapon it would later go on to be in the forces of Alexander the Great, of the Romans, etc. So chariots are a little less anachronistic here, this staple of Homeric warfare. From a thematic perspective, at least, that sort of logic of the influences, other factions that have access to chariots, it makes a little bit less sense beyond rule of cool. So I think armies like orcs and goblins having chariots, certainly warriors of chaos having chariots, they have them because they look fantastic. And just the idea of this warrior of chaos, the big burly orc, whatever it may be, raging across the battlefield in this contraption, smashing into his foes, scythed wheels, running amok. It sounds incredible, and it looks, as an idea, as a thematic thing, really, really good. But I think it does make sense that chariots aren't actually necessarily all that. Let's face it. Again, I don't know, he's talking about history again. When the Romans invaded Britannia, they were perhaps slightly surprised to see that the British Celtic tribes were still using chariots. It's something that had fallen out of favour on the continent with a move towards more regular cavalry and infantry, rather than, well, heroic individuals on chariots. And let's face it, if they were really, really good, obviously you had novelty items like the Scythians using their scythe chariots a lot and stuff like that. But if chariots were the bee's knees, let's face it, people would have carried on using them rather than turning to more what is now viewed as the traditional cavalry arm of an army. But enough negatives, let's talk about the positives, aside, of course, from the rule of cool. So, is there value in chariots? Well, yes, I think there is. The first one is they can act as a character mount. They can add a bit of ablative toughness, a bit of ablative wounds to a character, making them that little bit more survivable. Interestingly, I think things like the orcs really benefit here. So an orc chariot is actually surprisingly easy to get rid of, but if it's a mount for a character, suddenly it means your one cannonball's probably not going to be enough, whereas it might be enough in a normal circumstances. And if you're a chaos sorcerer, let's say a level 1 battle magic, you've got the impact hits if you get in from your chariot. You've got the potential for hammer hand being a boost for you as a combat batty wizard, and these are wizards that are also capable of throwing hands if they need to. So actually it does lean into quite specific ideas around combat wizards. The other thing worth bearing in mind, I think, is chariots are very much a support weapon, but what they're not good at is supporting cavalry. This comes back to my point around lacking swift stride. Chariots are normally a little bit slower than cavalry as well, so they're going to struggle to make those long charges, and realistically the cavalry will have fought and either won or been utterly ravaged by the time the chariots get into the combat, meaning they're either picking up the pieces, which they don't need to do, or they're going into a really bad situation, which they don't want to do either. But we're now seeing, of course, the rise of the concept of infantry, particularly with people who want to play the scenarios, to take strategic locations, to hold their baggage trains, etc., whatever it may be. There's more infantry going to be on the tabletop, and infantry being so much slower, actually the chariots can sit a little bit behind your infantry line and act as a counterattack. So you can try and absorb the charge on your ranked up unit of infantry, and then send the chariots in to try and turn the tide in subsequent turns. It gives your opponent something to think about, because there is quite a strong aggressive counterattack that can be launched using a chariot or two, and it will be supporting a unit which isn't going to outstrip it for speed. So either in those cases of trying to support cavalry, your cavalry is going to go off by itself and get the job done, or not by itself, or you're going to be holding back your cavalry in a way that you don't want to. Infantry don't have that problem. You're going to be able to keep up with the infantry. And as such units start to get depleted over the course of the game, actually a second or third wave attack consisting of chariots could really be quite effective in breaking through those weakened blocks of infantry. They're probably not a out and out first strike weapon, so again thinking those Scythian scythe chariots being the first in to disrupt enemy infantry units before the main clash, that's not really going to work, but they might be able to help out once things have got a little bit more, shall we say, unstable. Now, hand on heart, I really do like the visuals of chariots. That perhaps comes across in this video. To the extent I am starting to think about, do I do some new Halls of the Sea? And I've got a list idea which does actually have a lot of chariots in it. Partly because I think if you're going to go with chariots, you need to have a lot of them, because it at least gives your opponent lots and lots of targets to worry about, rather than being able to focus them down if there's just one or two of them. But I am yet to find a really effective way of making them work and making them be really quite dangerous. So the character mount, supporting infantry, I think all that makes sense, but I'm yet to really see it work. And here's the traditional point now for me to turn over to you. Have you seen chariots used particularly effectively? Have you developed a tactic yourself which really wrings out every point's worth of use out of those weapons? Let me know down in the comments below, as always. And all that remains for me to say following that is thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and a like and subscribe is always much appreciated. I am returned to the old world. Have a great day.